Hi, it's Raghu Markus back with Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network, and I've got uh, some delightful people that I want to introduce you to. And I think there's no doubt that there's very few of you who listen to this program or listen to any of the programs or the podcast rather on the Be Here Now Network have not heard of Alan Watts. And I was just telling, so I let me just welcome to Alan Watts. Of course, has a number of children, but the two young ladies that I have here right now, Anne Watts and Joan Watts. Welcome to Mind Rolling.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. And so, what has piqued my attention is this wonderful book that came out recently, towards the end of last year, the end of 2017. It's the
Early
collect.
December.
Yeah. Oh, so it's really brand new, and
Yes,
it's the
December
collect.
6th.
The collective letters of Alan Watts, their father. Uh, Joan and Anne put this together, and when it's a large book, by the way, everybody. I mean, what 500-600 pages. I was a little daunted by it, and then it is got to be one of the most fascinating books that. Of course, I love Alan Watts, so there was a natural affinity for me to. Oh wow, this, that, and the other. I'm finding this out, that out. Stuff that I had no idea about, and I knew something because and many of you out there may know this and may not know this. This being Ram Dass's Be Here Now network, Ram Dass and Alan knew each other, were friends. To what degree, I don't really know. I haven't actually gotten into this with Ram Dass. He's writing his memoir right now, so I'm sure we're going to find out more of that. But I do know that they were involved in psychedelic experiments in the '60s, and I think that Alan was really closer to Tim Leary because I saw letters to Tim, but I didn't notice any letters to Ram Dass or Richard Alpert.
There
So,
was one letter in there that was addressed to all of them, but Ram Dass was included in that letter.
yeah. So there's a direct connection, and as I was saying to Joan and Anne before we went live here, uh, I can't tell. I said I cannot tell you how much mail we get at the foundation where people are thanking us for presenting Ram Dass's stuff and lectures and books and all that stuff. But at the same time, if it wasn't for Ram Dass and Be Here Now and Alan Watts, I don't know what I would have done. So much of that comes in on a regular basis. So the connection between the two of them far exceeds the fact that they knew each other and were friends and so on. But let me get to. I mean, these letters have been around. I mean, I cannot believe how how much your father wrote to everyone. I mean, everyone, and how extraordinarily detailed these letters were. I mean, they're really incredible. And so you've had these for a long time. I know that. What suddenly motivated you to put these together into this book? How did this all come about?
Well, it probably came about the time I retired back in 2015. I'd run a business for over 20 years and retired from that. And I've had sitting in my office since about 1992, two legal size file drawers full of his papers, everything from manuscripts to letters and contracts and so on. And Anne and I were visiting with New World Library a couple of years ago. They've been republishing some of Alan's out of print books. And I happened to mention to Jason Gardner, the executive editor there, that we had letters. And he kind of perked up and said, "Letters?" And so he said, "Well, have you considered publishing them?" And we said, "Well, that would be a good idea." And he said, "Well, maybe we need to find an editor to go through them and so on." And I said, "Well, I think Anne and I can do that. And so they very courageously signed a contract with us for about 300 pages of letters, and we delivered a manuscript with 600 pages. And he said, "Oh, we might have to cut some of this out." And we said, "Well, good luck." And he started to read the letters, and he couldn't find any to cut out. So I think
There
we
you
ended up taking out 3 letters.
Really?
But that's the history of it. So
Oh my.
in a nutshell, it was a lot of work because uh, most of his letters, probably 95% of them, were typewritten, and so we were dealing with carbon copies. And the letters from his to his parents were all original copies, but again, sort of fuzzy typewriter stuff. And I think at the time his parents, or at the time he was writing his autobiography, In My Own Way, which was published in 1972, it's my feeling that his parents sent him all the letters that they had saved of his over the course of his lifetime. So that's the material we had, and it was a hard process. Anne and I spent a week going through every single file, every single letter, deciding which would be appropriate to publish.
Mm. Wow. And I mean, after reading through here, there is a lot of letters that, well, I don't know if I would. There was one point in the book where you went, maybe this is too much information on some of this stuff, and it was pretty amazing. How did you deal with all that?
Well, that was an interesting journey. I mean, Joan and I wrote various bits to try and fill in the gaps so that people could really understand what was going on. And it was an emotional journey for us, you know, to go through all this. And I think the letters that he wrote to Jano were the ones where we felt the most too much information. Those were very deeply intimate letters, and he wrote a lot of them because they were separated by distance a fair amount of time at the beginning of their relationship. And so, yeah, I just think that, you know, other than that, it felt like the story that needed to be told in terms of a full picture of who Alan was as a real human being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, Anne and Joan, can you just hold on 1 second, because I've got a doggy problem here. I'm gonna fix. So hang on 1 second.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
Hi.
Can you see my hand? Oh, no, you can't. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you must be sitting near a window. You've got good bright light on you.
Yeah.
My back is to the window, but I don't know how I can change it without
Right.
a mess. So
Right. When you're talking, you're full screen, and so it doesn't. You can see more of your face that way.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back. JR, our editor, you can make a nice edit there. Would be good. You know, one of the things that I mean, immediately just stood out very early in the book, and I must read this little thing, the little passage. Just the fact of where he was at, where his understanding at such an early age. I mean, February. This letter is from England to Mr. Sokean Sasaki, right? One of his first mentor, in 1932. What age would he have been?
He was 17.
Okay, so this is a 17-year-old, everybody out there, okay?
It's amazing.
From what you say there, and from what I have read elsewhere, the essence of Zen is to regard existence universally or impersonally, or so I understand. Instead of thinking I walk, you think there is walking, until you begin to see yourself as a part of the universe, not separate from other parts, while the I is as the whole. I have tried this. How did he do that? And he tried that. And the result is, at 17, is that there comes a feeling of calm, of indifference to circumstance. I mean, it's really pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
So, what were your earliest memories? I mean, as you started to grow up, of being introduced to, so you have him as, of course, the man that was your father and the man that went on many escapades over his life. But what about that inner power that he had to be able to grasp these concepts in a way and be able to elucidate them? And when did you first kind of go, oh, wait a minute, he's more than just my dad here, he's a something? When did that occur to you, both of you?
Well, I think when I was a little girl, one of the things that I think he wrote about, maybe he didn't write about it, but in my memory, um, I had a favorite carved teak box that I loved, and I had always wanted to get inside it. And obviously, it was a small box, so there was no way I could physically do that. But he coached me through the process of getting into the box mentally.
Oh, we
Which
have
was,
a little something. What's that?
I don't know.
I'm just putting myself on mute. It's my phone. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway,
yeah, maybe just if you can go back a minute and just repeat that, that would be great, Joan.
when I was a little girl, I had a favorite carved teak box, and I always thought it would be thrilling to be inside that box, but obviously I was too large to do it. And my father had this wonderful knack of being able to tell me verbally how I could imagine myself being inside it. And I thought that that was an amazing quality. I just thought, wow, that's so interesting.
Hmm. How old were you then?
Oh, probably about 6 or 7.
Right. Anne, and you?
Um, I love that story. I think that's the first time I've heard that story, Joan.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That's really great.
I mean, I definitely experienced him as someone who was really in touch. I don't think I understood, though. I didn't really grok the brilliance and what he was contributing to the world in the bigger picture until I was in my teens. I think as a child, I was aware of all the interesting people in our lives and the color in our lives, and people from all different countries and places, and all of that. I was aware of that, but I wasn't yet aware of who Alan was in terms of his contributions to the world. That came much later.
Yeah. Um,
I would say that's true for me in a sense as well, as that even though I experienced him as a unique human being, his impact on the general population did not really come to me until probably I was in my mid-teen years.
hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense, too. 'Cause your dad is your dad for as long as
Right.
that holds.
I had this experience. I was going to girls' boarding school in England, and the boarding school bordered on our grandparents' home, and so my father came to visit me there, and he came to the school, and I was stunned when the teachers and the other girls in the school were all a Twitter because they thought he was so handsome. And I had never thought of my father as handsome. I was just like, "What? My father?" It was it was just such a surprise to me, and so interesting how, sometimes we can categorize somebody in a certain way, and we don't really see what other people see, right?
Yeah.
And then hearing that feedback was just amazing to me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, he was dashing, all right. You can see that in the pictures and the videos for sure.
Right? Yeah, yeah.
Um, in early part of the book, you talk about how you were amazed. I'm not sure. The interesting thing in the book is how you both have uh, dialogues going on about that particular period or things that had happened. And this one is from you, Joan. Uh, you were amazed at the progression of his thinking through these letters. And I find that very amazing as well. But to see right out at the get go at 17 years old, that thing I read, I mean, that's
Mhm.
just, that's pretty astounding. And how that progression, I mean, he came in obviously with a very advanced realization of the truth of reality. I mean, there's no doubt whether he lived it or not. I mean, you also say interesting. I remember reading. I can't remember which of you said you talked to Ramdas, and Ramdas said Alan absolutely knew what quote unquote capital IT was, what it was, but he wasn't necessarily living capital IT. And this seems to be a theme, a little bit of a theme throughout the book. But my premise is there are things that people do that society may not really it may not conform. And obviously he did. I mean, he did amazing things. I mean, the thing that having an open marriage in the late 30s, early 40s, whenever it was, he decides to have an open marriage. Who would think of that? I mean, that blew my mind. You know,
While he was an Episcopalian priest.
Yeah, I
even
would
better.
say that I would say that that was somewhat with European influence.
Mm,
Of course, American standards were very different than Europe in terms of marital relations and so on. So I think he picked up a little bit of that from the continent, but it was certainly the avant-garde here in the United States.
yeah, way avant-garde. Yeah. And well, in this, he was able to go from interpreting Eastern philosophy to New York society in his adroit fashion to becoming involved with the higher ups of Christian faiths. How did you see him doing this? This is quite a. I still don't get the. I get the Christian thing in some of the way that he manages to manifest the similarities of all mystical faiths. I get that, but to become actually an Episcopalian priest, right? That's what he became.
Mhm.
Right.
How did that happen? I mean, that's just that's out of that's out of my reach in terms of understanding.
Well, I think once he came to the United States, he was needing to find a way to make a living, and that was complicated by a number of factors. But he and our mother Eleanor, for some reason, decided to investigate all the churches around in their neighborhoods and so on. And he, they basically found one that they really liked, which was sort of high church Episcopal. And he set about thinking, well, this was something he could get into and uh, make some sort of living at. And of course, being the scholar he was, he advanced very quickly once he was sent off to seminary in Evanston, Seabury Western. And he kind of became a golden child in the sense that his knowledge of Christian doctrine was so great that he excelled, and people loved it. And once he became a priest and was doing mass and so on, people thronged to hear him. A combination of his wonderful ability to speak and speak clearly and clarify things for people, as well as his knowledge.
Yeah. In fact, there's just a little something here that he talks about this. And again, this is 1943, still a very young man. He says, a lot of things have happened to me during the last 5 years, and it's only recently that I've been really able to see what they were. Before that, my own version of them was not the real version, for I have done a lot of things for stupid and silly motives, which by the sheer grace of God and nothing else have turned to my own advantage. For instance, I had the queerest reasons for going into the priesthood, and the moment I decided to do so, everything clicked to move me in that direction, as if it was a prearranged plan. But when I thought I was arranging the plan, it subsequently became obviously the plan was arranging me. So I can't claim any credit at all for what has happened, having done anything but to deserve it. For there is a wisdom, and this is we were just talking about just this kind of thing in a retreat that we just did with Ram Dass and others, and Jack Cornfield. There is a wisdom which employs all the weaknesses and foolishnesses of this world for its own purposes, and people are used by it in spite of themselves. It makes you feel such a fool, but a grateful one. So he obviously early on understood that we are shown by virtue of our acts on a day-to-day basis where we can transform ourselves, and he understood that obviously through what he was saying here. But in those years, what is your memory of being with him during the Christian years? And was his relationship with your mother more stable at that time? And what was that like? I mean, to be with him in that environment of the church.
Well, it was pretty exceptional. He was very much into the ritual of the church, and even more so to the extent that he really brought in more of the Catholic ritual into his masses, and he really seemed to prefer a high mass situation. There would be incense and vestments and Gregorian chants and so on and so forth. And that was all very beautiful to me. I thought it was lovely. And it was very disappointing years later when one day when I was at school in Ojai, I dropped into the Episcopal Church one Sunday morning and was astonished to see none of that. It was very boring and very plebeian, basically. It was just not very much fun. So I disbanded that. But I think that was his fascination with it, was the liturgy, the whole going back to the beginnings, basically, of ritual in Christianity, and just really reveling in that and producing it beautifully.
Yeah, he loved the Gregorian chant, that kind of thing. He loved good church music. There's a lot of church songs that are really whiny kinds of songs, and he was not interested in any of that. He was interested in really good music. He loved good music, and so wherever he was involved, whether it was the chapel at Northwestern or whatever church he was being involved in, he made sure that the choir was bringing beautiful music to the congregation as a part of the whole picture. And I love that he did that. I think that was a really beautiful and special thing. And it's just part of his whole artistic nature, which was very strong in him, and on all levels. And so I felt like that was a big piece of how he was too. I think also he was so compassionate and kind and understanding to go along with his brilliance. He was just as good a listener as he was a speaker. And I think people were very drawn to that. People felt cared for by him and seen by him. You know, he had that kind of listening that really saw into a person, and people felt that, and I think that was also a part of his popularity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Was-
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I was just going to say it was interesting too. As a child, I had the opportunity to go with him to a Greek Orthodox church and a Russian Orthodox church, and watch him take part in those liturgies. He would be often asked, sort of on an ecumenical basis, to be involved in other faiths.
Hmm.
Mm.
You guys are pretty lucky. I wish my dad would have made church, or in my case, synagogue, fun, and it sure
Right.
wasn't. Although, you know, in
Yeah.
my case, it led to a huge dissatisfaction and emptiness that led me to read Alan Watts and find my way to the East. That's
There you
one of the
go.
Right.
things. So, you know, it's weird how it all works out. But I love, but during his years of priesthood, and the book is sectioned off by virtue of the different lives that he had. You know, his priesthood lives, the American Academy of Asian Studies, when I guess that was out, started on the East but ended up out West, and so I like the way you've sectioned off the book, because it really
Oh,
gives
thank you.
a picture,
Yeah.
you know, continuum that you can really follow. But this is one part. It's funny because he talks about Krishnamurti, so he got exposed to just everybody,
Hmm.
and
Right.
I mean, just amazing the breadth of his ability to move in all of these different circles, literary, spiritual, and otherwise. Um, I mean, he even puts down Buddhism in a certain way. He says, "I grant you the Dhammapada and odd bits here and there show that much of this material was written by bored monks on wet afternoons with nothing better to do." He's really, I love that. That underneath there is a core of sense. Um, but what remains to us today may have been Gautama's own teachings, may have been his own teaching, is so slight that it doesn't even begin to compare with Lao Tzu, the Upanishads, and the Gita. It's just take no prisoners kind of thing. And then he talks about Krishnamurti. He says he had a great deal on the ball, and he's marvelous at spiritual cathartic, but he only had one idea. And then he said, he says it's the power of life, whatever that may be. Yet, though he won't or can't admit it, he's talking about God. He shies away from the word. One must sympathize because that word has some very bad association attached to it. I mean, I just love that.
Yeah.
Um, as just going forward, I mean, we touched upon this, and of course, this is all material that I had no idea about. None of us who read Alan's works or listen to the talks and so on, we were not privy to his personal life. And then you read this and you go, "Whoa, wow." He was far out in a lot of ways, not just in his thinking. But obviously, and I mentioned this before, he had that unusual open marriage, and that was in a time, you know, of God, is it I don't know, is it worse now than it was then? Who knows? I mean, you know, with the far right and religious
It's
right and
more
so on.
open now than it was back then.
You think? Okay, I'll take your word.
Well, I think it comes and goes. I think it's one of those things that opens up and then shuts down again and opens up and shuts. It's that cyclical thing about life and politics and religion and what's at the forefront. But I think that there are a lot of people living in many different types of relationship who connect with each other, but it's not all that known in the bigger to the bigger public,
Yeah.
right? But there are a lot of people living alternative lifestyles,
Yeah,
no
no,
doubt
true.
about it.
True. But for being children at that point, I just wonder, you know, how you were able to absorb this in a way that wasn't detrimental to your development as a child, And also, one thing I read, no matter what he was doing and whatever affairs and so on and so forth, he seemed to really love you guys, and he was devoted, and he was right there for you. Am I getting the right impression? So within this, maybe you can just comment on.
Well, most of the time he was right there for us. But no, the first 10 years of our life, of my life anyway, and 4 years younger, he was around a lot because those were the church years, the Christian years, and we had a steady home life, even though towards the end it became complicated by having extramarital relationships. And for me, when I was about 10, when it was sort of the thick of all of that, it was complicated because I went to school, I had friends. And of course, people started understanding what was going on at Canterbury House. And my friends weren't allowed to come over. I was allowed to go over to their houses, but they weren't allowed to come over to mine. So you can get the sense of that. But, also for me, I think along the way, because of the nature of my upbringing, um, I did not develop the fierce sort of one relationship type of life either. Seeing other people in different relationships didn't seem to affect me as much as it might affect some others that were religiously bound by one partner only for life and death till you part. So.
All of which works well for some people and not for others.
Yeah.
I was a fair amount younger than Joan, so I was unaware of a lot of what was going on back in those days. It didn't affect me in the same way. However, our experiences as children were quite different because when Joan was born in 1938, our parents were right in the flush of their love for each other and their connection, and they doted on Joan. They loved her. They were just so happy to have her. And by the time I came along, things were beginning to fall apart between our parents, and so my mother really didn't want me, and especially when I turned out to be a girl. She had hoped for a boy, and she didn't get that in me. And from the time I was an infant, she started taking out her unhappiness on me. So I had a very different experience than Joan did. And you were talking about Alan, how much he loved us and how present he was for us. He was, and he did in the way that when he was with us, he was really present, and he was very playful, and and liked teaching us things in a fun way. But he was gone a lot. He was gone, doing whatever he was doing, whether it was when he was in the Christian ministry or later on in life. He was writing a lot, and his attention was focused on his writing, or he just wasn't present. He was gone giving lectures and doing talks and stuff like that. So a lot of times he wasn't available because of that. And then the other thing is, it really shows up in the letters. He was well aware of what I was experiencing with both my mother and my stepmother, his second wife, Dorothy, and how they treated me, and he felt badly about it, but he never became my ally. He never stood up for me.
Oh.
And in that sense, I felt let down by him that he didn't. And that was pretty hard. But other than that, I adored him, and I loved our time together, and that has always been true.
I'd like to add a little to that too, in that while my parents were very much in love when I was born, neither one of them had the experience of being around young children. They were both only children. My mother was raised by a governess and had no imprint on what mothering was because her mother was not a good mother. And my father, of course, was distracted by all his very interesting things that he was doing. Obviously, he was fascinated with my development, but about the time of their divorce, I was sent off to private schools and didn't see much of him. And in fact, when he was supposed to pick me up for a long weekend, sometimes he wouldn't even show up. And the school would have to figure out where I was going to stay um, for that time period. So that was hard to feel somewhat neglected. And although when he was there, he was marvelous. He was fully present.
And that's really, I guess, as you can tell, I have a certain impression. I obviously saw the places, and certainly, Anne, it was very pointed how the difficulty you had with your stepmother. I mean, that sounded like a horror, and so much of the time he was traveling, he was away, he was involved in God knows what.
Right.
But I still get through all of the pages and the letters a dedication to his children in a way
Right.
that many people, there's no one quite like him, one could say, but people in the arts and entertainers and so on like that, they just abandon. It doesn't even, I mean, myself, I raised two boys. And my wife did most of the raising. I was away a lot. I traveled a lot, and so I understand that. But it does come through that his love and caring, I guess, in the moment was certainly present.
Right.
And it
Yeah.
means something because it, again, has to do with he espoused all of this incredible spiritual knowledge, and how much of it was he living? And to me, that gave some indication that he was living it, and certainly you all are an example of that up to a point. But what the other thing in this book, by the way, as you can tell, everybody listening, there is a lot of information about Alan and his relation with his family, his wives, his relations with many other people from Henry. I love this, the letters to Henry Miller. I mean, those were extraordinary. And so many people like that. He'd write to anybody. It's just, I have to read something later on. He wrote to a restaurant where they wouldn't let him in because he wasn't wearing shoes or something. You know, it was
That
like,
was one of my favorite letters.
it's my favorite too. I'm going to read a little bit later. But at the same time, throughout the book, which the nuggets that are in there that really translate a real connectivity that he had to the truth, those are precious. And so in the section, it's 1951 to 1957, and the heading is California and the American Academy of Asian Studies, and Ram Dass remembers, I think just after that, or no, during that period, he had a radio show, right? Was it that period or just after that period? I can't remember.
I think it started somewhere in there.
Yeah, I
know
think it
it
did
was on
too.
KPFA for many years.
Yeah. Ram,
And it was called something like Way Out West or Beyond the West or something like that.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, Ram Dass does remember the influence because he was at Stanford and he used to listen to Alan on Sundays. He said, so that was
Interesting.
yeah. So
Yeah.
here's one of these nuggets, and it comes from a Time magazine, published some sort of article. It's called Zen, Beat and Square. Okay, in 1958.
Right.
It's a great.
Yeah.
For Anglo-Saxons, the main obstacle to the achievement of Zen's peace is an inability to purge themselves of the need for self justification.
Mm.
This urge to prove oneself right has always jiggled the Chinese sense of the ludicrous. The Chinese, who rated human-heartedness ahead of righteousness, powerful thing right there, human-heartedness ahead of righteousness, felt that one could not be right without also being wrong. At the roots of Chinese life, there is a trust in the good and evil of one's own nature, which is peculiarly foreign to those brought up with the chronic, uneasy conscience of the Hebrew Christian culture. That is an incredibly incisive quote from him, and there's so many of them in this book. So anybody who is a fan of Alan's work, and again, many of you that listen to Be Here Now Network, I know you are, so I can't more highly recommend. I don't want to be a salesman here, but still, it's really pretty good. The next section, which is then it starts to get into areas that I remember being a hippie back in the West Coast in the late 60s, which is where, I became aware of Leary and Alpert, and you talk about how he was involved with Leary and Alpert during their studies of psilocybin and LSD at Harvard, and he was involved with their experiments with prisoners at the Concord Prison Project in Northern California. Were you aware of that at the time? Because then you were more adults at that time.
I was living in the Midwest, and I'll never forget, it was mid-60s, Time magazine came out with an article about Larry and Alpert in Harvard. And there was a photograph, and in the photograph was Alan Watts, but nobody picked that up at the time. And I breathed a big sigh of relief because I was living in the Middle West with an up-and-coming executive for a company, and I thought all I needed was for people to know that my father was involved with experiments in LSD and psilocybin. So that was kind of amusing to me. That was kind of the first really that I knew that he was involved in that, just seeing that picture.
That's funny.
I had some awareness of it. And, one of the things that I really appreciate about our father was that in his studies with them, for him, this was more like a religious experience and something that he treated very seriously and very circumspectly. And I think, unfortunately, in later years, people let go of treating it with that kind of reverence and circumspection. Is there such a word? People just really began to get more interested in having the experience of being high. And whereas Alan was really a student of what was happening to him and what he was experiencing. And I know that there were a couple of times when he introduced me to LSD, and how perceptive he was when we went on those journeys together. And it was a very powerful and deep experience to share with him. I have one vivid memory when he came up to me and asked me where I was. And at the moment, I was experiencing being underwater in the sea. And as I was describing to him what I was experiencing, I experienced him diving in with me, and I could feel him underwater with me, experiencing exactly what I was experiencing. And that was very profound to me.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Oh,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, not many people can say their fathers turned them on to LSD.
No.
My wonderful experience in that time was the first time he introduced me to LSD was he played for me the Gregorian chants, and then he played the Beatles. And I had this amazing realization that the monks singing the Gregorian chants were off someplace moaning because they were ungratified somehow. They were missing out on something in life. And the Beatles, they were going to be the new Bach, Beethoven, etc. of the coming years.
Yeah, and they did. They
They
are.
did. They are,
Yeah,
without a
it's kind
doubt.
of amazing.
Yeah.
But that was like 1968, so it was like before they actually, well, they were on their way, but it wasn't like it was way out there. So
Yeah. Yeah, you got your father to turn you on to acid. That is like so great.
Yeah.
In my case, by the way, just as an aside here, and many people know this, I've talked about it before on Mindrolling. My father, I was in India with Ram Dass, and my brother and my wife to be, and we were with Neem Karoli Baba, and my father decided I'm going to come visit them. He flew from Montreal to come see us. You know, he was at the
Wow.
time 50-odd-year-old advertising executive. And there he is, and I'm like, oh God, how can I'm not going to be able to handle it? We were at odds as well, and so it's a famous story that I tell that it's in the book Love Everyone, actually, that we put together of all of our experiences going over there, the Westerners that did that. And he turned to me and he said, "Did you give your father the medicine?" I go, "Yeah, he had a cold. I gave him some aspirin." He said, "No, no, no. The yogi medicine that Ram Dass gave me." I went, "Acid? My father? No." And my father went, "LSD?" Anyhow, he said, "Take care of your father while he's in India." Anyhow, my father took acid. So I gave him some. It's a little bit of a reversal here. But
Right.
similar, and he who thought he wasn't afraid to die had no connectivity to who he truly is. He had this incredible journey, and after that, we became friends for
I'll
life.
bet.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
that's
isn't that
fantastic.
great?
Great
That's a
story.
beautiful story.
Thank you.
Yeah. Love it.
So I just got to give, as we get closer to the end of the program, but I delight in these letters that have these nuggets in them that are just, and there's so much of it. I mean, this is something you could treasure for a long time. Enlightenment, wisdom, or a sense of harmony with life and the universe is present within us all the time. It becomes apparent when we cease to use the brick, and he had talked about getting hit over the head with a
Right.
brick, right? When we stop knocking ourselves out on the head with a brick,
Right.
So when we cease to use the brick, just as the moon becomes visible when the clouds are blown away. Very wonderful poetry, really. But we appreciate the light of the moon more keenly when it emerges from the clouds. If it had been shining openly all the time, we should never have experienced the sudden ecstasy of light breaking in upon darkness. And for this sudden ecstasy, we have to be thankful for the darkness as much as for the light. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
I always felt that was the epitome of a lot of what he had to teach was the difference of knowing the difference between black and white. If you didn't have black, you wouldn't know what white was,
exactly.
and vice versa. And that way, pain, ecstasy, you can think of all of those dualities and how if you didn't experience one of them, you might not understand the other.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to mention something
Yeah.
that we didn't tell you about, but you mentioned Sokyan Sasaki and Alan's early connection with him, because Alan had heard what a great teacher he was. And there's a new book out called Zen Odyssey by Janica Anderson and Stephen Schwartz. And this is the story of Sokyan and Ruth Fuller Sasaki, who was our mother's mother, and the birth of Zen in America. And it's a very thoroughly researched book, but told in a very easy to read story fashion. But it completely interweaves with our book because there's a lot of talk about Eleanor and Alan and their connection, and Ruth's connection with Alan, and through the years, and so that's reflected in both books. And there's a letter from Sokian to Alan in this book, Zen Odyssey, and so there's just this very delightful interweaving. And I think it's important for people to know about Ruth was the first woman and the first Caucasian accepted into the Zen priesthood in Japan. And her journey is an amazing story. And she was a very serious Zen Buddhist scholar, and translated books from Chinese and Japanese into English with the help of, among other people, Gary Snyder, who was also a really close friend of Alan's. So, there's that connection as well. And so Joan and I love telling people about that book because we think it's a really important story for people to know, and it's just an additional perspective. Yeah.
We'll, by the way, we're going to put all of this up on the show notes on the podcast page, BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling, and we'll put, of course, the link to be able to get your book, The Letters of Alan Watts, and also this Zen Odyssey, and other books that Alan wrote himself. Of course, we're going to put those up there as well. Just before we go, I do want to just ask you, what feelings have you, what's happened to you in the course of doing this book that maybe gave you a little bit of a shift in perspective about your father? Something happened to me. Of course, I come from ground zero except for his books, but still, there was a lot of illumination. So what happened to each of you in the course of putting this together and reading all these letters?
Well, I think it was an amazing journey for both my sister and I. I think we became closer through the process of it because we understood a lot more of what was going on in our lives. You as a child, you see things and you think certain things, and you carry those memories with you into adulthood and beyond. And it was kind of a verification of what we experienced. And I think that was helpful to us in many ways, especially for me. And certainly a much better, well, it was a great time of reflection on my life and Alan's life, and how I came to be the person I am. And it's also sort of morphing into something more interesting as I'm going on here now. I thought all I had to do was write a book, and now all of a sudden I'm on book tours and radio talks, shows, et cetera, and so that's a whole different thing. I hadn't really anticipated that, so it's interesting. It's an interesting journey.
Yeah, I bet. Anne?
I had some similar experience to Joan, especially the bonding between her and me was very special and continues to be. And I think another aspect of this, I think, for both of us is the appreciation of the scope of his brilliance in a way that I hadn't really ever grokked before. And through these letters, I was just struck again and again and again by the depth and the breadth of his knowledge and awareness. And he was voracious in terms of wanting to study everything and to understand how the mind works and all of that. He was just voracious in his study of all that. So just and the appreciation also of how much he has affected so many millions of people worldwide as evidenced by the many Facebook fan pages for Alan, who have members from all over the world, and emails that Joan and I get from young people, very young people, like a 15-year-old from Denmark or a 26-year-old from Iran. We just heard from who discovered Alan. A friend had the book Psychotherapy East and West, and they can't even get books by Alan Watts in Iran right now. And so he heard a podcast interview with us and was so excited by it. So, those kinds of things. It's really very heartwarming.
Yeah, I have to imagine that.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things towards almost the end of his life was, I think it was in April of 1973, he brought together a group of people. He learned about a man by the name of G. Spencer Brown in England who was involved in quantum physics. And he found that absolutely fascinating. And he brought him to this country to introduce him at a workshop at Esalen that Ram Dass participated in, as well as many others like John Lilly and Claudio Narano and a number of different people you would recognize. And to me, that was absolutely fascinating. I always felt like, hear people talk about you're either right-brained or left-brained. I think this man operated off both sides of his brain without a doubt, to be able to be artistic and write the way he did, and yet understand things as complex as languages, Latin and Greek and quantum physics, even. I mean, what a brain.
Yeah, what a brain.
Intellect.
Yeah.
What a brain.
Right.
And yet, through all of this, these incredible letters to everyone on the earth, family, friends, notable people from Jung. When I don't know, he's in his 20s. He's writing Jung, Carl Jung.
Right.
I mean, it's just crazy stuff.
Right.
Then there's this letter towards the end of his life, a few years before he left. He went to a restaurant with his wife, and they wouldn't let him in. So he wrote a letter to them. But from your establishment, we were rudely excluded by an arrogant young man for the peccadillo of wearing sandals over bare feet. Otherwise, we were elegantly, if informally, dressed. Now, your food has been consistently excellent, but you are not the St. Francis Hotel. If you have an eye for the future, bear it in mind that you are operating in an area where an increasing number of young people, your customers to be, are unwilling to dress like morticians. And then further to that, why must we be obliged to come to your restaurant with our feet sweatily enclosed in wool and tight leather, observing a mere ritual which, however appropriate in the snows of Chicago, is unnecessary in California? I really believe that a change in your policy is in order, as well as an apology to a longtime customer. Okay.
I love that letter. I like to read that one too.
Yeah, that is so great. Oh,
Yeah.
God. Well, thank you, Anne and Joan. Thank you so much for being with us here at Mindrolling. And I love all the connectivity. I'm going to have to query Ram Dass a little bit further about his relationship with your dad. And share that with everybody. But yeah, good luck with the book going forward. We're going to make sure everybody knows that it exists, and in fact, we'll get in touch with you and your publisher. And I want to put some excerpts, if I can, a couple of these nuggets on ramdass.org, so everybody can share them, and I'll get in touch with them on that. And again, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, this is Mindrolling. I'm Raghu, and we'll see you next time on the Be Here Now Network.